Hey guys, what's up? It's Yannick. I'm here with Dive, and I wanted to take the opportunity to talk you through some of my favorite positive psychology books, particularly in relation to coaching. I just came back from a positive psychology coaching weekend here in London, and I had packed up a big chunk of my library and just brought it down because I think books are a wonderful opportunity to learn, to inspire, to make us better coaches, but also to spark debate, spark thoughts. So I wanted to take the opportunity while they're all nicely stacked up and just give you, say a few words about each. And perhaps some of you will get inspired to read a little bit more about these things and also to discuss stuff that's coming up from them. You know, coaching is such a broad range. Everybody's got their own styles, but I think it's really useful to have a bit of science and evidence based behind your coaching practice and see which bits can inspire the way that you work with your clients. So I'm going to start with the few publications that exist about positive psychology coaching specifically. Then I'm going to go into some of the more broader introducing positive psychology as a subject, as a field of science, and then into some quite specific areas within positive psychology, and then a little bit beyond the science and see what's out there for the mainstream, a bit more engagingly written, and explain a little bit about what they're about, and then let's make a start. So the first one is going to have to be one that I've written for this wonderful coaching school, Anima Center for Coaching. If you have not heard of them, go check them out. Wonderful approach to training. I used to run this weekend positive psychology coaching there and written a little course book. So I've tried to pack all of the subjects within positive psychology that I found most relevant to coaching practice, and just introduced what they are about with a couple of sources for further reading. So this is a wonderful introduction to what there is in positive psychology and how we could make sense of positive psychology coaching or positive psychology within coaching. That's why I called it positive psychology for coaching. And you can download that from my website. You can also, if you're part of Animus, you can download it from their intranet. So check that out and would love to hear what you think. Then, just recently published, Positive Psychology Coaching in Practice by the wonderful Susie Green and Stephen Palmer, Australian-UK duo, who just a couple of months ago they came out, and they really packed a lot of stuff into this, mainly getting some of the really big names within positive psychology who are also coaches involved in describing in which areas positive psychology could be applied in a coaching framework, all complete with a case study. So you look at leadership, you look at education, you look at specific topics within positive psychology that such as engagement, work engagement, positive emotions, lots of topics and how they can be applied. So this is going to be a really good start of a conversation of what a model for positive psychology could be, how you can work with well-being theories. Very, very good overview. Then, one of the earliest books on positive psychology coaching, following up on what Biswas wrote in as a theoretical framework. This practicing positive psychology coaching is much more focused on applying positive psychology coaching within a coaching framework, how that could look like in practice. So lots of really practical ways to apply it, lots of storytelling in there. I really like his writing style. Mainly focused on strength, on how to use psychometrics and assessment, how to use positive emotions, how to use well-being theories, and interventions, positive psychology interventions. So lots of really good stuff in Robert Biswas book. Then what came out next, when there really wasn't a lot around, is Coaching Positively by Matt Driver. Matt talked to a lot of his colleagues and is drawing on a lot of his own coaching experience on how to use positive psychology within coaching. So lots of more ideas in this book. Check it out. It also feels really nice. They have a really nice finishing touch to this book. So if you don't read it digitally, I can recommend getting a copy of that. Then we have Sandra Foster and Jeffrey Auerbach, who also quite early in this journey packed a lot of scientific findings and how it could be used, not just in personal life coaching, but also in executive coaching. So they have another focus on organizational sector specifically, and was one of the earlier books on positive psychology coaching and what's out there. So there's another really good opportunity to gather a bunch of ideas. Right, that's pretty much it on positive psychology coaching as such. There's a couple of research papers that you can look up, particularly by Lindsay Oates and Jonathan Passmore. They had a series of research papers of how we could use interventions within a coaching framework. But I'm going to focus on books for the time being. So, in terms of overview of positive psychology, here's a great overview by my colleague Bridget Greenwell-Cleave. And this is a practical guide to positive psychology. And it has, it's a small book and not particularly thick, so you get a really good overview over positive psychology as a science and as a field of science. Bridget is very evidence-based, so all of this is a really engaging introduction to all of the topics that are out there. A couple of years old already, but so positive psychology is developing fast, but this is an excellent introduction to kind of give you a good overview over what's actually being studied in this field. Similarly, by Ilona Bonneville, this was probably the first book on positive psychology that I've read. There's a couple of editions since, so she's been updating this. Positive Psychology in a Nutshell. And it basically is what it says on the tin. Ilona's writing style is nice. I've known her very well because the masters, when the second masters in Europe, when the first masters in Europe, the second in the world was established, that was Ilona's work. So I spent a lot of time with her while I was studying that. So there's lots of really good information in this and very easy to digest. She said she wrote that book to replace this one, which is Positive Psychology in Practice by Alex Linley and Stephen Joseph. This has been around for a while, and if you are academically minded, this will really be the overview that you need to really dive into the academic side of it. This is academically written, so and really thick, you can see, but a lot of really good stuff is there, and the focus is on positive psychology in practice, so how it can be applied and what's actually out there in terms of science. So for the more science-minded and for you, this will be a very thorough guide to what's out there. More applied, more digestible, but still with a very applied, very application practice focused perspective is my colleagues from the University of East London, Tim Lomas, Kate Hefferon, and Itai Iftzan. Applied positive psychology. This comes complete with questions, reflective questions, exercises. So this is almost an academic course, but in a book. So you can go through all of the sources that they would recommend when they're teaching, and basically leading you through a module in applied positive psychology at a very high level, covering a lot of ground, but with a critical focus on how we can apply positive psychology to practice. So this is fantastic. Martin Seligman, the founding father of positive psychology, who announced positive psychology to the world when he became president of the American Psychological Association. He first wrote, I have that here on the left, he wrote the first full-length book, Authentic Happiness, which is now a little bit outdated, but still very much relevant in terms of the concept and how he came up with why positive psychology is important in the first place. Then 10 years later, roughly, he published Flourish, which is his new well-being theory, PERMA. And those of you who have looked into some of the well-being theories, his name is very much out there, his theory is very much out there, very popular. And he's a very engaging writer, so I can recommend Flourish to gain an insight into what well-being is and how we could conceptualize it. Then one of my favorites, which kind of became coverless because you can see I had a bit of an accident at some point when I was painting. It's called A Life Worth Living, and it's edited by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi and his wife. So they brought a lot of big names from positive psychology together to write about what is a life worth living, and it's got one of my favorite chapters on materialism and its alternative by Tim Kasser, who I've had the pleasure to meet when I was studying 10 years ago. So A Life Worth Living is an excellent compilation of articles by some of the big names within positive psychology, all around the theme of, well, what is a life worth living? So I really recommend that. Here's the Bible, shall I say, for evidence-based interventions by Sonja Lyubomirsky. Also, there's an updated version, so the cover might look a little different. But Sonja really put all the evidence-based interventions together. A lot of positive psychology is about, well, creating interventions from the knowledge that the science created. What can we actually apply to our lives or to individuals and communities? So that we can increase well-being, happiness, and lots of other factors and elements and building blocks of happiness. So Sonja really compiled all the evidence-based interventions, wrote a chapter on each of them. There's lots of amazing stuff in there, very practical, some self-assessment measures in there so you can test it out on yourself before you use it with your clients or other groups, organizations. So this is a fantastic book by Sonja. Very much grounded in the science, which is always something I very much value. Then on the topic of flow, we've got our main man Csikszentmihalyi, who initially wrote Optimal Experience, Psychological Studies of Flow and Consciousness. So this is the more scientific academic version. If you want to learn about flow and you're academically minded, I recommend Optimal Experience. His more engagingly written Flow, The Psychology of Happiness is more for broader mainstream. So you don't have to have any knowledge in psychology or science really to make sense of this book. That's fantastic. It really changed a lot of how I was thinking about flow and engagement. And it's excellent. Again, the cover will look a little bit different now. There's another excellent book on flow, which is by Stephen Kotler, and it's called The Rise of Superman. It's a lot more engagingly written. It has a lot more relevance within a more modern framework. These guys are active in Silicon Valley. They have a lot of friends around the tech industry, and they research flow, not from a necessarily academically grounded, and not academics as such, but they're very academically minded and informed. But they very much have they want to bring flow and engagement and show how it actually is applied within, for example, teams of Navy SEALs or organizations like Google, and how we can, how it's culturally relevant and how we can really push ourselves to get into more flow states and be more engaged in our lives. So this is a fantastic book, also relatively short, and a great introduction to the topic. Here we have Seligman's Learned Optimism, which is a wonderful, the subtitle says How to Change Your Mind and Your Life, and so you can already tell this is more written for the mainstream, very engaging, very easy to digest, but with lots and lots of scientific findings, how we can actually learn to be more optimistic, and optimism not just as in a broad outlook, like a positive outlook on the future, like everything was going to be alright, but also about explanatory style, dispositional optimism. A lot more about that in the course, but it's a wonderful way to explain what optimism is in the new academic science of positive psychology, and also how we can actually learn to be more optimistic and how we can change our mindset to get lots of benefits from the science, so we can put it in practice. So, Learned Optimism by Seligman, also a wonderful book. Here's again Stephen Joseph, who I've introduced earlier, about the very academic textbook. He also wrote a few books to bring positive psychological knowledge more into the mainstream. So he wrote a book, What Doesn't Kill Us, echoing the famous Nietzsche quote, and also Frankl talked about this makes us stronger. So this is a book about overcoming adversity, about in positive psychology we talk about post-traumatic growth, that when adverse challenging things happening, more people than not don't go to post-traumatic stress disorder, but more people than not actually learn something from the experience. They grow stronger as a result of challenging things that happen to their lives. There's a lot of research around it. Stephen Joseph is very much grounded in the evidence, so this is a fantastic book to learn more about post-traumatic growth and how you can overcome adversity and move forward. So Stephen Joseph, wonderful man. Here's one of the big ones, Carol Dweck's Mindset. And this book was very influential. A lot of people rave about it, so you have probably heard around this now. Her research brought fixed and growth mindset on the map. So this is probably one of the most important books written within positive psychology. You often hear about people talk about positive thinking, and this comes close to positive thinking because you would change your mindset, how you explain your things. Learned optimism is kind of related to that area, but it really, if you change your mindset, then a lot of good things will happen in your life. And this is a fantastic insight into where this whole new science around mindset comes from, what is actually the evidence that we know, and moving away from you just have to think positively, but we don't really know why and what it does, to really being very evidence-based into why mindsets work and what work actually means in that context. So you'll struggle to put this down. I really recommend Mindset by Carol Dweck. Here's a wonderful one that I really couldn't put down, which is The Power of Negative Emotions by Biswas Dina and Todd Kashdan. For me, this is particularly relevant because from positive psychology, I then studied existential coaching, and if you know me a little bit further, you know I'm quite the existentialist. So I didn't just want to look at the bright side, and I was very much aware that there's a lot of things happening in our life. Life will give us lemons and throw us curveballs, and life will be tough and challenging, and that we shouldn't ignore negative emotions because they're very useful to us. So they help us survive, but there's so much more to that, and really I think we need to live within dialectics and value both positive and negative emotions. So these are positive psychologists, or at least two names who were associated a lot with positive psychology, and they wrote a book about what are negative emotions actually good for and why we need the whole enchilada, as one of the chapters is titled. And the subtitle is How Anger, Guilt, and Self-Doubt Are Essential to Success and Fulfillment. In America, this was called The Upside of Your Dark Side. So, wonderful book. I really recommend it. It introduces a bit of balance into positive psychology and opens the doors into what we could call second wave positive psychology, or what Paul Wong has called second wave positive psychology. And this brings me to the next one, which is again Itai, Tim, Kate, and Piers Worth, Kate Hefferon, Tim Lomas, Itai Iftzan. They've picked up on what they've discussed with Paul and what we've developed at the University of East London, and they wrote Second Wave Positive Psychology, subtitled Embracing the Dark Side of Life, which kind of picks up on this idea that positive psychology isn't just 0 to +10, and it's all about what's right with people and well-being and happiness and positive emotions. Really, how can positive psychology be relevant to the darker spectrum of human existence, to the challenging bits? And it's a wonderful compilation of chapters, each from a different author, to really illuminate what positive psychology has to offer on this other spectrum, the other side of the coin. So this is wonderful and super relevant, particularly when we work with coaching clients who do experience challenging situations, and we want to work with people across the spectrum. This is fantastically relevant. Then that brings us... by the way, here's a couple of more that give you an insight, an overview of positive psychology. There's Alan Carr's Positive Psychology, which is one of the first ones I've read around, what is there out there. And Alan Carr's a wonderful writer, so you might look into that. I really liked Charlotte Style. She's a wonderful human being, and she studied MAP in the very, very first cohort and then wrote a book, Change Your Life with Positive Psychology, a lot more practical advice in the brilliant psychology series. So yeah, you can check that out, and that's excellent. And also Christopher Peterson, may he rest in peace, who worked a lot with Seligman on, for example, the strength assessment, the VIA. He wrote a primer in positive psychology, and that's also a fantastic introduction. So then there's three that I really like that don't come necessarily from the positive psychology scientific community, but Darren Brown's big name in the UK as an illusionist, magician, but also a psychologist. Really interesting character. If you don't know him, check him out. I didn't quite know what to expect when he wrote about happy. I realized through the advertising and the promotion that it was a book that was very critical of the self-help industry. And then what I didn't know what to expect, so I read it, and it was very engaging. What I did not expect is that it's basically a book about Stoicism and Stoic philosophy and how it can be applied to your life. He takes us through different conceptualizations of happiness, some positive psychology related, but most of it is more of a historical account of what happiness was in terms of how religions, predominant religions in our times, have influenced our views on happiness. But then he really takes us through techniques of what we can do to stay happy, inspired by philosophers like Seneca or Marcus Aurelius, to really help us to become more happy. A lot of the cognitive behavioral movement, Alice and Beck, that was influenced by Stoic philosophy. So this is quite a practical guide to how to control your own thinking and how to work with the stuff that usually makes us unhappy, negative feelings, for example. But also a wonderful chapter on aging positively. So how do we exist towards death? How can we meet our own demise with a positive attitude? So I, as a positive existentialist, I really loved that chapter particularly. You talk to people who are dying from cancer and how they make sense of meeting their end. And he met some wonderful people, very inspiring stories in here. So Darren Brown's Happiness is a very, very cool book. The Secrets of Happiness, Richard Schoch. I think he called it Schoch. I haven't met the guy. I don't know how to pronounce his name. Sorry, Richard. But this is wonderful. Takes you through 3,000 years of conceptualizing happiness. Again, more in a historical frame. But I think it's useful to go beyond the science of qualitative research, quantitative research, and also take into account the history of how we have made sense of happiness. The Secrets of Happiness, interesting choice of title, probably sells more copies if it's a secret and we get to know it, but I really enjoyed reading it, so I could recommend The Secrets of Happiness. Now, my most gifted book, shout outs to Tim Ferriss at this point, that's the one I would bring up if he would ask me that, is Live Life, The Sunny Side Up. Jeremyville. Wonderful. I've seen stickers around. I've seen him as an artist around, and then this is just a wonderful book with illustrations and little bits of advice. And a lot of this advice, with my positive psychology science lens on, are absolutely grounded in evidence. I'm not sure if he did the research into it and that went in, but it's just absolutely wonderful, relatable, just beautifully illustrated life advice on how to live life sunny side up. So, Jeremyville, thank you very much. This is fantastic. And maybe just quickly for the more academically minded among you who really like some science in their life, Psychology of Human Strength. At this point, also, please go by Ryan Niemiech's book. Niemiech is Niemiec. Book on strength, character strength interventions at the Field Guide. Fantastic book. This was my overview into the science behind character strength by Lisa Aspinwall and Ursula Staudinger. So, thick one, academic one. If you want to tackle that, go tackle it. Similarly, with if you're using psychometrics, if you work in organizations, for example, if you're a researcher, or if you just want to capture a very specific concept that is grounded in science, and you want to go beyond a questionnaire that isn't particularly grounded in science, this is evidence-based psychological assessment within positive psychology. That's the definitive handbook, Lopez and Snyder. Again, this was updated only recently. Thick book, gives you all of the information. And do look out for positive psychology journals. Google Scholar is a good source for looking at what kind of publications are out there. But the ideal way is really to go to your library and find the positive psychology journals. Positive psychology is one of those, and the level of depth, the level of academic writing is excellent in those. So just keep in mind that all of these mainstream books that are written very engagingly, they're based in the science. So for those of you who want to go beyond the surface and harvest the knowledge and then apply it and really go to the source of where this knowledge is produced, those are the kind of journals and the compilations of articles that you really want to dig into. And with that, I conclude new books are coming out every month, so keep yourself up to date and read as much as possible, I would say, and not just read, but actually go out and discuss it. It's not about just reading and digesting the knowledge, reflecting on it, integrating it, what you already know, and particularly what you do with your clients in the coaching room, and discussing it with other coaches, with other academics. This is where we really grow from. So don't just read and discuss. And with that, I say thank you very much and hope you enjoyed this. If you're interested to learn more about positive psychology, particularly within coaching, I do run an online course, and it's on positivepsychology.training. You'll find more infos there. And hope to see some of you and hope to converse and debate some of the topics that are in these books. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.